Ma'am, this isn't the kind of place where people just walk in off the street. The woman's voice rang out, cold as the freshly polished showroom glass. Imani Brooks stood silently at the front desk of Kingston Auto House, a luxury car dealership in the heart of Atlanta, dressed in a faded gray hoodie and worn-out Adidas sneakers. No one realized she was the new owner of the entire dealership chain, but Karen Whitlow, the branch manager standing across from her, clearly recognized something else. She didn't belong. Comment 1 if that opening just shook you and left you speechless. Inside Kingston Auto House, the world gleamed, built from real leather, ambient LED lighting, and soft R&B humming from a recessed Bose speaker system. The cars were displayed like artwork, gleaming finishes, interiors lit by golden tones that whispered exclusivity. In this world, everything was meant to scream class. And there was no place in that design for someone walking in wearing a nameless hoodie. No place for a black woman walking alone, without an appointment, and without the right kind of aura to be received as a serious buyer. Imani Brooks, the new CEO of Kingston Auto House, was a black woman in her early 40s, with a strong, athletic build, deep brown skin, and neatly tied-back braided hair. No makeup, no diamonds. But in her eyes lived something Karen couldn't read. The calm of someone who'd stood behind podiums, made decisions worth hundreds of millions. Imani hadn't come to make a scene. She came to observe, to listen to the truths that boardroom reports never told. She'd once been rejected by a place like this. Back when she was 27, just after securing her first round of funding for her first company. She never forgot what that rejection felt like. Karen Whitlow, flagship branch manager, approached with a forced smile, hugging a clipboard to her chest like a shield. Every step, posture, and glance she gave was a silent evaluation. "Can I help you with something?" she asked flatly, her eyes locked on Imani's shoes. "Just looking around," Imani replied, calm, steady. Karen raised an eyebrow. "These vehicles start at 6 figures. We usually require pre-qualification, unless you're just passing by." Every word slid like a polished knife, but Imani didn't flinch. She only offered a faint smile. "Interesting." Imani walked slowly past the rows of vehicles, her eyes scanning everything, from how staff greeted other guests to the furrowed brow of an employee who noticed her touching the door handle of a luxury SUV. No one asked if she needed help. No one offered an introduction. She stood there in a $1 million showroom and was completely ignored, like she was invisible. Karen trailed behind her, her eyes sharp, treating Imani as if she were a theft risk. "If you're seriously considering a purchase," she said, offering a pre-owned inventory list, "we can recommend something more accessible." Imani took the paper without a word, folded it, and tucked it into her pocket. "That's quite the assumption," she said, still watching her reflection shimmer on the glass of a silver coupe. Karen crossed her arms, pretending patience, though her tone had dropped a note. "I'm just trying to be realistic. We don't want you to waste your time." Imani turned to face her, direct, unwavering. Her gaze wasn't angry. It was precise, surgical. "Let me ask you something," she said calmly. "What makes you think I'm not your target customer?" Karen flinched, just for a second, then straightened. "I've been in this industry a long time. I know who belongs." The silence that followed was heavier than steel. "Then maybe," Imani said, pulling her phone from her hoodie pocket, "you should call the owner. Let them know I'm here." Karen frowned. "The owner doesn't just drop by." Imani smiled and raised the phone to her ear. "Good thing I brought myself then." Imani turned her back to Karen and spoke into the phone with quiet clarity. "Terrence, it's me. I'm here at the Atlanta branch. We've got a situation. Could you come down?" Karen froze. Staff nearby exchanged looks. Whispers rippled across the showroom. The air turned thick. Karen looked around, her suspicion shifting into something closer to panic. Who did you just call?" Imani didn't answer. She just smiled, slipped the phone back into her pocket, and stood tall. "They'll be here shortly." Karen took a step back, The clipboard nearly slipped from her fingers. The same people who had just ignored Imani now dared not make eye contact. The showroom doors hadn't even opened yet, but the storm had already begun. And Karen Whitlow had no idea that the woman she tried to turn away was the very one who held the fate of this entire place in her hands. "Just calling the owner," Imani said, calmly, without raising her voice as she lifted the phone to her ear. Karen Whitlow froze on the spot. The entire showroom felt like someone had hit a pause button. The hum of the AC, the faint clack of heels in the distance, everything was swallowed by a rising sense of unease. No one understood exactly what was happening, but everyone sensed it. The woman they just dismissed was not a random walk-in. Comment 1 if you're holding your breath waiting to see what happens next. Kingston Auto House had always been a place where customers were treated like royalty, but now, the staff looked at each other with nervous glances. A few whispered behind the tinted glass office wall, others faked adjusting the showroom cars, yet all eyes kept sneaking toward Imani. She stood tall beside the silver coupe, phone still to her ear, posture straight, expression calm. But her presence had filled the entire room. Karen hovered on the edge of a cliff, fingers clenched tightly around her clipboard, throat dry. Who did she just call?" a young staffer whispered. No one answered. Roughly 7 minutes later, the automatic glass doors swung open. Terrence Shaw walked in, navy blue suit, gray tie, polished brown shoes. His gaze was sharp but composed, and each of his footsteps carried weight, pulling attention like gravity. Karen instantly went pale. "The regional director," she whispered to herself, then straightened up, desperately trying to erase what she'd just done. Terrence didn't look at anyone else. He walked straight toward Imani, and when he smiled, bowing his head slightly, "Ms. Brooks, so sorry to keep you waiting." The room didn't make a sound, but it exploded inside. Karen's face drained of color. She stepped forward, scrambling to save face. "Wait, I'm sorry. What did you call her?" Terrence turned, looking at her for the first time. His tone wasn't angry, but it was firm. "Ms. Brooks," he said clearly, "the new CEO of the Kingston Auto House system." One staff member dropped a folder. Another nearly muttered, "Oh, damn." Karen stared at Imani as if she were a stranger. I didn't realize." "Of course you didn't," Imani replied, voice smooth and cool like cold jazz. "That was the whole point." Imani turned to look out across the entire showroom. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to flash power. "I walked in today as a regular customer, and I was received, well, I think everyone here saw what happened." Every pair of eyes dropped. The air grew so thick it could have been cut with a blade. Karen said nothing. She stood like a statue. Imani took a single step forward, tone still composed. "I'd like to speak to your entire team. Right now. In the conference room." No one resisted. Even those who hadn't spoken a word understood. The storm had officially arrived. Inside the glass-walled conference room, every showroom employee was present. Not a word was spoken. Karen sat near the end of the table, hands clenched, eyes fixed on the edge. Imani stood at the head. No papers, no slides. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice calm but echoing. "If I hadn't made that call, if I had just walked out that door, would anyone here have cared?" Silence. She scanned the room. Would anyone have stopped me, offered help, or even acknowledged that I existed? This silence wasn't accidental. It was a verdict. Terrence stood in the back, arms crossed, nodding slowly. He didn't step in. This was Imani's moment. Karen leaned forward, about to speak, but Imani raised her hand. "I'm not here to humiliate you," she said. "I'm here to confront a culture that hides behind marble floors and designer suits." Karen lowered her head, whispering, "I didn't know." "Exactly," Imani cut in, "and that's the problem." For the first time, Karen didn't defend herself. She just nodded, small, but enough for the whole room to see. Imani gave Terrence a small nod. He opened the door and motioned for the team to return to work. Karen stood up slowly, like someone waking from a long sleep. She wasn't fired, but everyone knew, after today, no one would look at her the same again. Imani lingered for a moment, scanning the room. "This isn't the end," she said, softly. "It's the beginning." A new chapter was about to begin, and this time, no one would be allowed to pretend they didn't see. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came to understand what culture I've inherited." Imani stood at the head of the table, voice steady and low. No slides, no charts. She didn't need them to speak the truth. The room was dead silent, like a courtroom listening to a final verdict behind closed doors. Karen sat at the far end, eyes lowered, fists clenched around the hem of her skirt. Jaden, the youngest sales rep in the room, watched Imani quietly. And in his gaze there was something different. Not fear, hope. Comment 1 if you believe every organization should be held this accountable. The conference room at Kingston Auto House was designed to impress VIP clients. Clear glass walls, walnut tables, soft golden pendant lights. But today it felt like a sealed glass box, forcing every eye to witness the truth they'd ignored for far too long. Power had drained from the room. What remained was responsibility. Imani didn't sit. She walked slowly around the table, and with every step, someone's heartbeat quickened in their chest. Jaden, 25, Latino, a new hire just a few months into the job, sat close to Karen. He was the only one who didn't look entirely ashamed or afraid, but conflict flickered in his eyes. Earlier, he'd been the only person to look at Imani like a human being, not a threat, but he had stayed silent. Imani stopped near him, not just looking, but making sure others saw that she was looking. Jaden swallowed hard. Maybe this was the moment. If he didn't speak now, he'd always be part of the silence. Imani paused, resting a hand gently on the table. "Today I wasn't judged for what I could bring to the table," she said. "I was judged for how I looked walking through the door." No one argued. No one dared. Karen kept her eyes down. Someone else glanced at the clock as if praying for time to move faster. Jaden looked toward Karen, then back at Imani. "I know," Imani continued. "I'm not the first person who's been treated like this here. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a fact." Imani stepped back, arms crossed. "Does anyone here want to say something?" No one moved. No one even breathed deeply. Then Jaden's voice broke the silence, quiet but clear. "Ms. Brooks, I think most of us try to treat people fairly, but sometimes I've noticed assumptions being made." A few turned to glare at him like he'd betrayed the room. "Not everyone's discriminatory," Jaden went on, "but a lot of times we don't even realize we're judging someone based on how they look." Imani nodded once. No applause, no compliment. She just looked at him, the way a real leader sees a rare spark still worth saving. "Bias," Imani said slowly, "will no longer be invisible in this system." She turned to the glass board behind her. With a red marker, she wrote 3 bold letters, RESPECT. "We're rebuilding from the ground up. Starting today, every Kingston Auto House location will launch a new training program. Not just about product knowledge," she emphasized, "but about how we see people." Some employees furrowed their brows. Others stayed silent, not from fear, but from reflection. Karen still hadn't spoken. Imani looked to the end of the table. "Karen," every head turned with her. Karen looked up, her eyes clouded with emotion. "Do you want to say something?" Karen swallowed. I made a mistake." Her voice trembled, but it was real. "I misjudged you, and maybe I've misjudged others too." Imani held her gaze. No softening, but no condemnation either. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "But an apology means nothing without action." "We'll begin the first training session next week," Imani said. "Attendance is optional." She stepped away from the table, ready to exit, but just before leaving, she turned back. "But if you don't believe in what we're trying to build, then This may no longer be the right place for you. Karen nodded slowly. No one knew what she would choose, but for the first time, everyone in the room understood. Real leadership doesn't need to shout to change an entire system. This place is about more than cars. It's about dignity. That's what Imani said at the top of the staff meeting that Monday morning. Not everyone clapped. Some exchanged quiet glances. Others stared at the floor. Not out of defiance, but because they'd never considered dignity a requirement in the car business. Imani wasn't looking for applause. She wanted to plant something this company had long abandoned: accountability to people, not just profits. Comment 1 if you believe respect should be the standard, not a privilege. In the days following the call that exposed the truth, the atmosphere at Kingston Auto House changed significantly. A new poster was pinned in the lobby. We don't prejudge. We pre-qualify respect. Human Resources began drafting a new service policy. The training department prepared a workshop on implicit bias. Some employees started adjusting, but others, those who'd grown comfortable with their status and stability, began to whisper. They didn't speak out loud, but their eyes spoke suspicion. She trying to turn this place into a therapy class? Someone muttered under their breath. Among the silent skeptics stood the veteran sales team, long considered the pillars of performance. They never spoke out against Imani directly, but in the break room the murmurs grew. We used to sell cars. Now we selling ethics? Some said Imani was too sensitive, or bringing her personal agenda into business. Worse, rumors began to spread. Maybe Imani didn't want people who didn't fit her culture to stay. It was classic defense. The old guard sensing their power under threat. The rumors finally reached Imani. During a closed-door management meeting, she addressed it head-on. I didn't come here to be liked. I came to make sure people here do what's right. One male department head crossed his legs and smirked. Are you sure this bias-free service culture is realistic? Sounds more like dogma than strategy. The room fell silent. Imani didn't argue. She simply leaned forward, voice cold as the glass showroom walls. Maybe you're used to environments where fairness doesn't get questioned, but here, I'm the one asking the questions. As the tension rose, Terrence, the regional director, walked in. Unannounced, uninvited. He stood there, arms folded, eyes locked on the man who'd just dismissed Imani. She's not tearing down the structure, Terrence said. She's cleaning it out. Heads turned. The man opened his mouth to push back, but Terrence wasn't done. This showroom has turned away how many people just because they didn't look expensive enough? And we've lost how many loyal customers to arrogance no one dared name? For the first time, someone other than Imani said it aloud. One man stood up in the middle of the meeting. No words, no excuse. He just walked out. No one stopped him. Another followed seconds later. No speeches. Just footsteps and a door closing. Their exit said everything. They refused the new direction. Imani watched them go, didn't call after them. She simply said, they've chosen the path they know. We'll choose the one that's right. No shouting, just a shift. One step, one closed door. Imani turned to the ones still seated. Cultural change doesn't begin with pressure, she said. It begins with choice. She placed a stack of materials on the table, new training guides, service flowcharts, and role-play scenarios. Those of you still sitting here, I believe you're ready to relearn. A few nodded. Some looked her in the eye for the first time, not as a disruptor, but as a real leader. Karen sat silently in the corner, but her gaze no longer avoided Imani's. At the end of the meeting, a single sign-up sheet sat on the table, title, Service Without Bias. One person walked up, picked up a pen, and signed their name. Not Jaden, not Terrence. It was Karen. No one said a word, but the sound of that pen scratching the paper was the sound of a milestone being set. Imani smiled, not in victory, not in triumph, just the quiet knowing. Transformation had begun, from the last person they ever expected. People can change if they're willing to face themselves first. The words were written in white ink across a blackboard placed in the center of the employee training area. Under the LED lights, they stood out, quietly but powerfully. Behind a one-way glass wall, Imani Brooks stood watching in silence. No one knew she was there. She didn't want to be seen. She wanted to see. Were the changes she proposed truly shifting hearts, or just reactions to authority? This was no longer a story of being insulted and clapping back. This was a story about who chose to stand for something real. Comment 1. If you believe everyone deserves the chance to change, but not everyone has the courage to take it. A week after the reckoning, Kingston Auto House looked like it had been polished anew. The space was still gleaming, the cars still flashy, but the way employees greeted customers had shifted. Welcome in. What brings you here today? Let us know how we can support you. These weren't just memorized scripts. They carried the cautious tone of people relearning how to serve, without prejudice. From the corner of the room, a young woman stepped in, wearing a thin earth-tone sweater, jeans, and Converse sneakers. No one recognized her, but she was the truest test the team would face. Her name was Gia, around 26, a black woman with loosely tied curls and a slender build, but a gaze that was genuine. She didn't carry a designer bag. She didn't move with the confidence of someone used to luxury showrooms. She walked in with hesitation. Her hands lightly clenched, her eyes lingering on a full-size SUV like it was a dream, not a realistic goal. A week ago, she might have been ignored, or worse, gently encouraged to leave. But today, the person who stepped forward to greet her was Karen Whitlow. Karen walked slowly toward Gia, no clipboard in hand, no tight blazer, just a crisp shirt, a soft smile, and eyes free from judgment. "Hi there," she said gently. "Take your time. If anything catches your eye, I'd be happy to help." Gia nodded. "I'm just looking." Karen didn't push, didn't mention pricing, didn't rush. But over at the reception desk, a younger staff member glanced their way and whispered, "Is she seriously wasting her time again?" A chill swept through the air. Karen heard it, and this time, she didn't stay silent. Karen returned to the front desk. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. "We don't speak about customers like that, not here, not anymore." The young employee froze, face flushing red. Karen didn't escalate. She simply added, "We're not in the business of judging people, we're in the business of listening." Back at Gia's side, she bowed her head slightly. "Take your time. I'll be right over there if you need anything." From the second floor, behind the glass, Imani had seen it all, and she knew. Karen wasn't putting on a show. She was changing, genuinely. Gia stood in front of a matte black crossover, fingers grazing the door handle. Karen approached quietly. "Beautiful model, isn't it?" Quiet engine, powerful interior. Gia let out a soft laugh. "It's probably way out of my range." Karen shook her head. "Everyone walks in here with a different range. Our job is to walk with them, not ahead of them." Gia looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. "Thank you," she whispered. "Anytime," Karen replied. "Everyone deserves to feel seen." Imani left the second floor quietly. No need to walk down. No need to gather the team. This time, action had spoken louder than any speech. In the hallway, Terrence was waiting. "You see what you needed to?" he asked. Imani nodded. "I don't need them to be perfect. I need them to be real." Terrence smiled. "So no one gets fired this time?" "No," Imani said. "Just those who choose to keep walking or step aside on their own." The next morning, every Kingston Auto House showroom received an email from Imani Brooks. Subject line, "Respect is now standard equipment." The message was brief. Starting next week, all teams will be grouped by region to attend the Service Without Bias training program. Thank you to those who didn't wait for permission to begin changing. At the bottom was one final line in small type. "Leadership is not a role. It's a mirror. Choose what you reflect." Respect isn't a policy, it's a foundation. Imani said it clearly without fanfare in the middle of the regional summit, where every Kingston Auto House showroom manager had gathered. No one laughed, no one clapped. The statement wasn't designed to impress. It was meant to make one thing crystal clear. This wasn't a workshop on customer service tips. This was a dismantling. Some faces twitched in discomfort. The reforms didn't cost anyone their job, but they stripped away the silent privileges many had long taken for granted. Comment 1 if you believe respect should never be a temporary policy, but a permanent foundation. At a conference center in the heart of Atlanta, Imani stood at the main podium for the first time as the newly appointed chair of the entire Kingston Auto House chain. The room was expansive, chairs curved in a semicircle. Behind her, a large LED screen displayed the theme: Building the New Standard. Service without bias, no spotlight, no host. Just Imani, a wireless mic, and the unflinching resolve of someone ready to strip away the system's glossy coating and address the rot beneath. This wasn't a company meeting. It was a declaration of war on the old culture. In the front row sat a man in a dark suit, salt and pepper hair, tablet in hand. His name was Lawrence Grant, regional director of the Western Division, famous for his sales numbers, equally known for dismissing soft trainings as unmeasurable and unnecessary. He glanced at the new training plan Imani was presenting, then gave a small shrug, just enough for those around him to catch the hint of disdain. To Lawrence, respect had never been an issue, as long as customers looked like customers. When Imani opened the floor for discussion, Lawrence was the first to rise. Ms. Brooks, I don't object to respect, but with all due respect, we're not selling ideology. We're selling cars. Customers want performance, luxury, not moral lectures. A few heads nodded, quiet approval. Imani didn't flinch. She asked simply, "Then what do you say when a young black customer walks in wearing everyday clothes and gets told they'd be better off elsewhere?" Lawrence hesitated. "I'd say that's an isolated incident." "No," Imani replied. "That's the system I inherited." Imani stepped down from the podium. No slides, no stage. She stood in the aisle, locking eyes with row after row. "When I was 27, she said slowly, I had just closed my first funding round for a startup. I walked into a dealership, not far from where many of you are seated now, to buy my very first car. The manager looked me up and down, then said, 'Maybe you're looking for something used.' No one exhaled. I walked out that day, but today I'm walking back in, not to buy a car, but to make sure no one ever has to feel small again. Just because they walked through the wrong door with the wrong appearance." Imani returned to the podium. She tapped to display the final slide. No images, no flashy slogan, just a stark, black and white sentence. "I don't want a dealership, I want a legacy." The silence was thick. Then, one person stood, then another, then a third, until the entire room rose in quiet applause. Not the kind you give to a charismatic speaker, but the kind you give to someone who finally said what everyone else had been afraid to. Lawrence stayed seated, face grim, but he didn't speak again. He had just learned a lesson. No conclusion needed. By the end of the conference, Imani formally announced the next phase: a full system rollout of the new training initiative. Not just for managers, not just for sales staff, but for security guards, receptionists, service techs, every employee. No one exempt from the responsibility of maintaining a bias-free space. The materials included not only policies, but real stories, situations like Gia's, moments like Imani's. This wasn't optional, it was now the condition of staying within Kingston Auto House. 1 week later, a photo was posted on the Kingston Auto House LinkedIn page. A group of employees stood side by side, Black, white, Latinx, Asian. Behind them, a banner read, "We're not just selling cars, we're rebuilding trust." The post had been reshared by Karen with a caption, "1 week ago, I almost lost my job. Today, I found my voice again." And below it, a comment from Imani. Leadership isn't about being right, it's about being real. Thousands of shares, dozens of headlines, and a company finally beginning to change from the inside out. The woman they once dismissed in sneakers now owns the future of this entire brand. The quote echoed across the LED screens, marking the opening of Kingston Autohouse' new Atlanta headquarters, where Imani Brooks was about to unveil the company's official cultural policy. She didn't stand there with the fury of that first day. She didn't wear the gaze of someone overlooked. She stood tall, calm, powerful, and unshakable in her quiet presence. Comment 1 if you've ever been underestimated, and chose to succeed without making a sound. The main hall glowed under soft lights, filled with media, top-tier guests, auto industry CEOs, and rising Black founders. This wasn't just a celebration of a new HQ. This was a eulogy for an outdated culture and a declaration of a new era where respect was no longer negotiable. At a round table to the right sat those who had once opposed her, now silent, watching closely to see what the woman in the hoodie would do next. They didn't know. They were about to be named. Imani walked onto the stage in a high-collar black suit, no flashy jewelry. Her braided hair coiled into a tight bun. Beside her stood someone unexpected, Karen Whitlow, no longer the arrogant gatekeeper, no longer a fallen symbol. Today, Karen stood as an official instructor in the Service Without Bias program, now deployed across the company. The screen behind them read, "From Silence to Leadership, a Journey of Accountability." The room held its breath. A young reporter raised her hand. A mic was passed. "Ms. Brooks, do you believe prejudice can ever truly disappear?" The room turned toward Imani. The question hadn't been scripted, which meant it was exactly the kind she liked. She didn't hesitate. She stepped to the edge of the stage and looked the reporter in the eye. "No," she said. "I don't." A quiet stir rippled across the room, a few stunned faces, but Imani continued. "Prejudice is a shadow we carry. It won't vanish. But we can choose, every single day, not to let it steer us." Imani paced slowly across the stage, a spotlight following her steps. Leadership isn't about eliminating bias, it's about refusing to surrender to it. Karen nodded from the side, her eyes glistening, not from emotion, but because she knew every word was earned truth. Imani motioned for her to join her on stage. "This is Karen," she said. "She once stood on the wrong side of that door, but she chose not to stay there. That's leadership." Karen spoke softly, but clearly. "I didn't expect to be forgiven. But I was expected to be better, and she was. Not through promises, but through action." The large screen lit up, displaying the new logo, Respect First Protocol, Kingston Autohouse's new core service policy. Below it, 3 key pillars: no judgments based on appearance, mandatory implicit bias training, monthly anonymous customer experience audits. The applause this time wasn't for show, it was earned. On the faces of former skeptics, managers who had once resisted or stayed silent, a new expression emerged: recognition. Some pulled out notebooks. Real change was finally trickling to the roots. Imani didn't give a long closing speech. She simply stood at the center of the stage and bowed her head. "Thank you for listening," she said. "Now go build the place you promised me we'd be." Then she turned and walked away. No confetti, no loud music, because this wasn't the day she won. This was the day the system became worthy of surviving. A week later, the video of Imani's keynote surpassed 5 million views. At a Kingston Autohouse showroom in Dallas, a young Black woman walked in, dreadlocks, t-shirt, joggers. As soon as she stepped through the door, a white employee approached her with a smile. "Welcome in. How can I support your day?" She smiled, nodded. Behind the scene, a line of text appeared on the security feed. "Service without bias. Live session active." A new era had begun. Not because one woman struck back at the system, but because she rebuilt it from the inside. This isn't just a story about a black woman being turned away in a hoodie, it's a reminder. You don't always have to raise your voice to be heard. Some, like Imani Brooks, choose to stand still, look straight into the system that excluded them, and quietly rewrite the rules. If you've ever walked into a room and felt like it wasn't made for you, if you've ever been judged by your clothes, your voice, or your walk, if you've ever silenced your truth just to avoid being labeled too sensitive or too disruptive, you are not alone. And you don't need anyone's permission to be present. Imani's story isn't a superhero tale. She didn't save the world. She simply asked the right questions in places where silence had been the norm. She chose to follow kindness to its end, even when the world wasn't kind in return. In a world where bias moves like air, you don't have to reshape yourself to fit a system. You can reshape the system so it stops pushing out people who look like you. Imani didn't come to tear it down. She came to rebuild what was always worth preserving. And today, maybe it's your turn.